This is an interview with Miss Dawn Eames in the Group Study Room 1 in the St. Mary's College of California Library, located in Moraga, California. The date is March 4th, 2014. The time is 5 o'clock p.m., and the interviewer is Ryan McKinley. When were you born?
August 21st, 1950, 5 years after World War II.
Okay. Where were you born?
In Berkeley, California.
Okay. Did you grow up in Berkeley, or did you move quickly to this area after that?
No, actually, my parents came to Lafayette after they were in Walnut Creek in 1950. So it was like several months after I was born.
So you were born in Berkeley, and then they moved up to, or they were living in Walnut Creek?
They were living in Walnut Creek,
okay.
Correct.
And then they moved down to Lafayette, okay.
And started a nursery business.
A nursery business, okay. So that kind of leads into my next question. So what are your parents' names, and what did they do while you were growing up?
Harry and Shigeko Ides, I-D-E, which is also German, but they're Japanese Americans. They started a nursery business. Originally, my dad was a landscaper because that was all that they could get after the war due to the discrimination. So they opened the nursery, and with help from a very wealthy lady, was able to build a house at the back of the nursery property and pay back, of course, the cost of the nursery to the lady.
All right, and approximately, if you remember, where was the nursery in Lafayette?
It's 3295 Mount Diablo Boulevard, right on the main
street. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And they did that for your whole time growing up, and up until they retired.
Yes.
Okay. So, can you tell me a little bit about what you remember about your neighborhood growing up, the house you lived in, and things like that?
Well, the small, I think it was like 800 to 900 square foot house, which was based on some military architectural plan with a flat roof, housed the six of us. I had three older sisters and my parents in that house, and because we lived in the back of the nursery, we had no playmates, basically. So we grew up very close together as kids, and we went to the local elementary school, and all the way up from, I went to Spring Hill School, M.H. Stanley Intermediate School at the time, and then Akalani's, and then went off to college.
Okay. And so, where you lived, was it a very diverse neighborhood, or were there a lot of different people around, or?
No, it was a business. It was a business area.
Okay.
Yeah. It was all commercial.
Okay. Commercial. And how do you think that's changed now as you see Lafayette?
A lot busier. At the time, there were, I believe, 22,000 when I was growing up. And now I guess there are only about 28,000. But it seems quite busy, and part of the problem, I guess, is because of how they've developed downtown core area, where they've put in a lot of landscaping and median strips and sidewalks. So it's not as quaint as when I grew up.
Okay. And growing up, do you remember things you did to entertain yourself? Was it just you and your sisters mainly, or were there neighborhood friends, or?
Very few. We were always told to study, study, and then before you do anything else, review your studies. So education was paramount.
Okay.
But it wasn't until maybe high school that we were able to really go out with friends, and even with that, it was very restricted.
Okay.
So we were the only Japanese, basically, or any people of color growing up in Lafayette. So everybody knew my parents. That was Harry's nursery, and you didn't do anything to tarnish, the name or the business.
Okay. So you talk a little bit, could you tell me a little bit more about your elementary school time and what you remember about the school and things like that?
It was a long time ago. Gosh, well, what's nice about having grown up in Lafayette is I still keep in touch with the people that I grew up with from, kindergarten basically, because a lot of the parents still lived there, even after we went off to college and then came back. And so some of the families own the homes still that the parents have left. So elementary school, I don't recall playing all that much. It was a big deal to go to the 6th grade there was the after school party at somebody's house. That was about it.
Okay. Do you remember anything about teachers that you had, or
in elementary school, or just generally that stood out?
Yeah. Or elementary school in particular?
In elementary school.
I know it's a long time.
Miss Agajon was my kindergarten teacher, and I remember just going to the zoo with the class and getting spit on by the monkey. That's about it.
Okay. And have you been back to the elementary school since you left elementary? Or?
No.
Okay. Are you able to describe to me anything that you remember from the elementary school, like the way it was laid out, or if they had a mirror?
They've changed it since, but I recall that I was very good at the bars where you'd get up on it and swing backwards with your knee, or one knee or both knees, and the rings. And I was good at kickball, but other than that, nothing much.
Okay. How about high school?
High school I was pretty shy until senior year, and I guess partly because my family was raised in Lafayette, that everybody knew my dad basically, that I ran for secretary of the senior class, and I got that. So I had, I was not well known, but just well liked, I guess, enough to get a position, and so that was pretty eye-opening for me,
Okay. And similar, do you remember specific classmates, friends, or teachers that you went to high school with that maybe left an impression or just come to your memory now?
I have a very small core group of friends, and I still keep in touch with them to this day. My husband and I actually went to school together since Stanley School, so where I first met him, but we didn't meet and get married until 25 years later. But we still keep in touch with some of our friends that are from way back.
Okay. Do you have any specific friend?
By name?
Yeah, if you want to.
Oh, yeah. Sally Morris was my kindergarten friend, who is now my sister-in-law.
Oh, okay.
And I introduced her to her husband, who is my husband's younger brother.
Okay.
So, and the Eames family also grew up since kindergarten there, and so a lot of our family members, my sister, I think my next older sister went to school with my husband's sister.
Okay.
So it was nice to get married and go to all the same, we have the same anniversary. We also have the same exact birth date, 6 minutes apart. He was born in Oakland and I was born in Berkeley.
Wow.
So, and we both families moved to Lafayette in 1950.
Okay. Wow.
So that's how we kind of kept in touch, because we were very close friends in high school. So he was basically my good friend way back then, and he's my best friend and husband.
That's great.
So, yeah, it's kind of fun. So we've had, I think we had one class reunion for Akalani's 1968 graduation year at our house. But since then we've had several, and I'm still kind of part of the group that tries to get some people together at El Charro and Lafayette there.
Okay. So how big was your high school graduating class?
About 325.
Okay. All right. And similarly, are there any teachers you remember, or principal, and specific events from high school that really stood out for you?
The teacher probably that was kind of influential to me was Miss H, or Miss Hamburger, who was my modern dance teacher, who was there since 1948 when the school opened. And so my two of my three older sisters were also modern dance, and you had to try out and then be in the performing art, at Christmas and Akalani's Musance, it was called. It had music and dance together performance. So, and I was in chorus with Mr. Hansen. He was very influential also in the sense of discipline and always being on time, and performing, because I was rather shy, and then so by the senior year, my sister ahead of me had also, I guess, been the class secretary. So I said, well, gee, if she can do that, maybe I can do that. So, and I kind of followed in her footsteps, not academically, but otherwise. So Mr. Hansen and Miss Hamburger probably were most influential as far as teachers that I recall. Mr. Glanz was a Spanish teacher of mine, as well as Mr. Hernandez in high school, and I can speak Spanish till this day still, so my husband speaks it fluently, so he helps keep me up on it, which is nice. So. And then otherwise people. I just have a core group of girlfriends. Ann Collister, her mom still lives in Lafayette, and we keep in touch. Corey Hollister, her parents used to live in Lafayette. They're both gone. And who else? Maris Emery. Her parents lived in Lafayette till they died. And who else? That was pretty much my core group of friends that I still keep in touch with.
Do you remember what their families did, their parents did in Lafayette?
Ann Collister's dad was a doctor, and Maris's dad, I don't recall at the time. I don't remember. And Sally's dad was a teacher in Oakland.
And so have you been back to the high school since you graduated, or similarly?
Just maybe for when Miss Hamburger would come back every year to hold a year dance workshop, all of her students from all of the years would get together. So when she died, I think I stopped going, even though they had several after her. But other than that, I just mainly go for, if we have a reunion thing. But that was, early on.
And so this Miss Hamburger, so do you know she retired shortly after you graduated, or quite a number of years after?
Quite a number of years. She was pretty old.
Okay. And then she still came back and did these kind of annual courses?
From back east, from New York.
Oh, okay.
So, every year.
Wow.
So dance was her life.
And that went on up until quite recently, or?
Yeah, probably within the last 10 years.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Quite a legacy. She used to dance with Isabella Duncan. I forget the name. Very famous modern dance pioneer. Yeah.
Wow. And then, do you remember activities you did while in high school, such as pep rallies, things like that, or there were?
I tried out for yell leader against my parents, and without my parents knowing it, because I knew they wouldn't allow me to do it. But of course, I didn't make it. But I think I went to maybe one homecoming game the whole time because we weren't allowed to go out at night. And I remember going over maybe to sleepovers very rarely. And one time when I went with Ann Collister on an overnight, we went out to TP at somebody's house, and I was scared stiff. So all I did was I took one piece of toilet paper and stuck it on a bush, and I went back to the car because I was afraid, that everybody knew I was the only Asian and person of color in the town, so they knew that it would be Harry's daughter. So I didn't do anything to tarnish the name.
So I'm curious, what was it like being the only person of color in this whole town, or for your family, or anything like that?
I think the next oldest sister and I didn't experience too much discrimination. I think the only time I recall was being at the in front of the Park Theater in line, and it was dark, I think, and somebody said "Ching Chong Chinaman" to me, and it didn't really relate to me because I'm Japanese, and that was their ignorance. But we were raised with very good self-esteem, and my parents said since it was after the war, they said, you need to speak English, and so we never learned Japanese growing up, so that you would be able to be accepted and assimilated, in the community. So we're when we were.
Yeah. So, and curious about your parents. Are they both originally from Japan, or they're first generation Americans?
They're both born here.
Okay.
My dad is called a Kibe, which is born here and raised in Japan. He was there until age 13 or 14, and then came back and never went back. And then, so he came back here with no English, basically. But he, had a thriving business and made it. And then my mom, who he met in Stockton, was born here in Stockton and then raised here totally. But her mother was alive, and her parents came here first generation. So she's called Nisei, which is second generation, and I'm third generation, and my kids are fourth, which are Yonsei.
Okay. And so, do you know much about your grandparents on either side?
Let's see, my dad's father died in Mexico City when he went to go see what happened to my dad's sister who had died, and evidently he had drinking the same water from a huge tank that she drank from that had a dead body in it. So he also, I guess both of them died in Mexico City. I never met them. And then his mother was in Japan the whole time, and I never met her. I didn't go back to Japan until 1986, and just the one older sister was alive at that time. And my mom's parents, when I was growing up, we'd only see them every summer, and they only spoke Japanese, so I couldn't communicate with them at all.
So they came from Japan every summer to visit you?
No, we went to go visit them in Stockton,
okay.
Every year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I didn't know what... Oh yeah, they owned a grocery store in Stockton. That's what he did.
And was it desire to come here just for like the kind of American... to have their kids born in America kind of thing?
It's the streets were paved with gold.
Yeah.
Basically for a better opportunity. Because I guess during the war, I guess my grandfather came over in the late, like early 1900s or so, and he made 3 trips here from Japan, which I was surprised to research a little bit, which I really should research more. But it's really interesting because it takes 2 weeks to get here by ship at the time, and not under cruise conditions.
And so they came, and what was do you know possibly the reason of, after your father was born, taking him back to Japan again? Was that...
That is common, evidently.
Okay.
His parents came over, because the streets are lined with gold and for better opportunity. And then I guess they had my dad, and then they shipped the child back through it's like a baby broker, it's called. Mm-hmm. And they learn the culture, and then they come back. So that was his story, evidently.
And so your father, you said he came back here at around 13, and was that to go into high school, or?
He was a houseboy in Berkeley on Euclid Avenue, and I drove him by the house years later, and he said, "Yeah, that's the house." And he used to sneak in when he'd be out late at night and sneak into the house. But I never got to speak with the people that he was the houseboy to. But I guess he used to run away a lot from his uncle, who used to be caretaker of the Shaylands Ranch in Concord.
Oh, okay.
And then he'd run away to L.A., and then I guess the uncle would go and retrieve him and bring him back to the Bay Area. So,
and so when he came here, he went to live with the uncle in Concord?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. So the uncle and one of his youngest sister are buried in Concord at the cemetery there that's the oldest in the county. Mm-hmm. And each plot is separate, so that you own the plot. And they had tried to move all the bodies at one time, including my parents. And they said, you can't do that because everybody owns their own plot out there. And it had, I guess, the founding fathers of the city of Concord also. So it's like, politically they can't touch it and dig up the bodies and move them to, I guess, Queen of Heaven in Lafayette there.
Oh.
So.
And do you know much about your mom growing up in Stockton and what she did?
I remember her saying that she didn't like Filipinos because in the grocery store she would help, and she'd hand these Filipino fellows who only came over, to get money again, to ship back to their families. She'd hand them money, and they'd try to, touch her hand and stuff, and she hated that. So she was very discriminating towards Filipinos. And at one time in college, I was dating a Filipino, and they said, "Don't ever bring a Filipino home to our house," and all that. So we went on. I kind of hid it from them for a while, and then I just said sorry. So I was basically disowned for a while because I was dating a Filipino fellow. But we're still friends to this day. So and they accepted him later, and they said, well, my dad actually apologized to me and said, I'm sorry I treated you like that, and said, we would never come to your wedding. They didn't come to my graduation from college at Davis, and your children would never be welcome in our house. And I said, well, this is my life, and this is the way I have to lead it. So later on, my dad apologized and said, I'm sorry that I did that. And I said, well, you had to do what you had to do, and I had to do what I had to do at the time. So that's what it's kind of how he raised me anyway, or our family is, if you're right, and you have to do what's right.
And so her Filipino, I don't know if dislike for was just from working at the grocery store and that experiences she had with whoever came in.
I imagine it went back to the war also. The Philippines and the Japanese did not have a good history during the war. So.
And then, so your mother grew up in Stockton, and then, do you know? And I'm sorry if I missed this. How did she run into your father?
It was an arranged marriage.
Oh, okay.
So I guess she went through some college and then went to Sacramento to work for the state of California, I think in DMV. and her mother in Stockton said, this fellow, my dad, wants to meet you or see you. So Bai Shakunin, which is a go-between, hooked them up, and my mom never wanted to marry my father because he was 8 years older, and they still got married because her father said this man will never lie, and he was a very upstanding citizen and very religious, although he was Catholic, and my mom was raised Buddhist. So we were raised Buddhist because her mother was still alive. So my dad said, go ahead and raise them, the 4 girls Buddhists, which we are. So.
All right. And so your father, it was simply the go-between person had mentioned there's this woman in Sacramento. Are you interested in seeing this woman?
Yeah.
He said okay.
Yeah. And he observed her, I guess, in the classroom because she was teaching Japanese language at the church, at the Stockton church. So I guess it was arranged, and they got married, and it was right before the war, so they had to they went to Reno. They had to get permission from the war agency to go get married in Reno, and then went back to Stockton, and there they were sent off to camp, concentration camp.
And so you said your mother was teaching at the church. Was that like the Japanese classes for Caucasian people, or was there kind of a Japanese
it was probably Japanese at the time. Now the Oakland Buddhist Church that I go to occasionally has all mixed races there that are Buddhist. So.
Do you know? So they got married, and then the war hit. And the war
hit. They were all put in to camp in Tule Lake first, and then my dad was shipped away to Aurora, Arkansas, and Texas, Crystal City, Texas, various places because he was an activist, and he refused to sign anything that said I'm disloyal to the United States because he was a citizen.
So when you say activist, you mean he was protesting the war? He was.
No, he said it wasn't right, but of course they had to go.
Yeah.
Under guns, so all the Japanese were told to sign a piece of paper that said, you are loyal to the United States, and he says, of course I am. I don't need to sign anything. So they shipped him off, and he was also treasurer of, I guess, a group in camp, so they felt like he was going to be a traitor of some sort and cause problems, so they shipped him away from my mother. So my mother had 2 babies, I guess, in camp, the 2 older sisters. So they later got reparations, in I think it's 1986, and they got the reparations of $20,000 each. But when they were let out of the camps at the end of the war, they were let out in New Jersey, and they had with $20, and they were told, to find your way back to the West Coast where you were born and raised, So kind of too late.
And so when they came back, was there all their property and everything was gone?
Oh yeah,
like that.
Yeah.
In the store.
My dad, though, was smart enough to, I believe, give a property to somebody, I think a Caucasian, that held it for them in their name. And then when he came back, that's how he was able to have some money, to start the business and pay this lady to help build a house and get the nursery property. And at the time, I just learned that the property was like $4,000 they paid for it, and now it's exorbitant.
So. Is the nursery still there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's right by the hotel.
Okay.
3 doors down from the hotel. It's now changed over to Mount Diablo Garden, Nursery and Garden, and the fellow that works there, or owns the business now, who bought it from my parents, used to work for my dad when he went to St. Mary's College.
Wow.
So, which is great that somebody, has a good work ethic and, respected my dad and vice versa. So it was nice, and I inherited the property.
Okay.
So.
And so your dad, when he came, just going a little back, you said he was living with the uncle, and then he came to St. Mary's before he met your mother, or?
No, he had very little college. He was very self-read and self-made man. I know he wanted to be an editor of a newspaper in L.A. at one time, but he read a lot of philosophy is all that I recall. But I don't know history-wise, much of his background is probably in that book a little bit.
Okay.
So I think he went to high school in Berkeley, and then he was part of the chemistry society and some honor society, so he did pretty well for not knowing English when he came here.
And then you said your mother did some college, but...
Did some college, and then, I guess started working for the state of California, but I would imagine in clerical, but I don't know. And then she worked with, side by side with my dad at the nursery, basically.
And so, let's see. Let me get my train of thought.
Sorry, I'm jumping around probably too.
It's okay. No. This is very interesting. I guess maybe I'll go back to the camps as well. So they went into camp. Your mother had one child, and then she was pregnant again when they removed your father to go to another camp. Is that okay? And then so she was by herself, or she was with
She was by herself. Well, her parents were with her in camp. So, but they would have they let her out to have, the 2 children, and then they were put back in camp once you have the children. But, at the time she was saying, they had no anesthetics at all, so, it was painful, and it took like 2 weeks, to get them out of the hospital and back into the camp. So the 2 older sisters were born in camp, and then my other sister and I were born after camp in 48 and 50.
Okay. And so your oldest sister, what is her name, and what did she end up doing?
Tokiko was a school teacher. She got married at age 22 and went with her husband to the Ellice Islands to do field work in anthropology, and just basically supported him, kind of, and then got divorced 22 years later, and then got a teaching credential because he ended up going into gambling, where they lived in Las Vegas. So she, I guess, retired as a school teacher kind of recently, like 6 years ago, and is now retired.
Okay. And then
the second oldest
second
sister is, she was kind of an artist. All I remember is she used to hand design material for Bayer and different companies, and she sent material back that she had hand dyed and textiles to send back to New York for string bikinis. But she's very artistic, but I don't think she worked out of that industry, but I don't really know all that much how and what she did. She died 6 years ago, so of cancer, and she lived in L.A. all of her life after college, which she met her husband in Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and his mother is still alive, so they lived in L.A. And Pat, my sister Pat, is a pharmacist, and she married a pharmacist out of UOP in Stockton there, and lives in Moraga also, 4 miles away, and is now working for the state. She used to work for Long's, which is now CVS, for 35 years, and now she works for the state of California in San Francisco in, I believe, the Medi-Cal program as a pharmacist.
And so all the sisters, they stayed in Lafayette until they went to college,
right.
And then that's when kind of branched out.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so after high school, where did you go to college?
Oh, I went to UC Davis for the first year. Went to Santa Barbara because I broke up with a friend, boyfriend from Lafayette, for 1 year, and then went back to Davis and graduated in cultural anthropology from Davis, and then worked for the state of California for 13 and a half years, and then married Patrick after he and the same fellow that I broke up with looked me up again. He lives in Moraga now, a street away from us, and his family's still in Lafayette also, his parents, and been married for 28 years, the same guy.
So your husband, you said you met him when you were much younger.
12 years old, yeah.
And so did you keep in contact all that time, or was a
because
break
of
off?
our same birth date.
Oh, okay.
And we were very close friends in high school.
Okay. And so after high school, where he went to Davis as well, or he went somewhere else?
No, he took over, or he worked at his dad's Ace Hardware business in Oakland, and he has 9 kids in the family. So the 5 brothers and 4 sisters. 4 of the 5 brothers have worked at the parents' business in Oakland, and now the youngest brother and sister own that store. And so Patrick and his oldest brother opened an Ace Hardware in Richmond, and the other brother has a store with Sally, my girlfriend, from kindergarten in Pleasant Hill. So there are 3 hardware stores in the area.
Okay. So he was born in Lafayette as well?
He was born in Oakland, yeah, and then moved to Lafayette in 1950. So.
Okay. And then his parents were running the hardware store that whole time?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And they're originally from the Oakland area?
Yeah, I think the dad was born in San Francisco and then was raised in Oakland, as was the mother, around the Lake Merritt area.
We talked about so many interesting things. I'm trying to pick what to
focus. Sorry, I'm
no. It's wonderful.
I do remember playing when we moved. When we moved from the nursery house, and we stayed there only once. I was 10 years old, so maybe 10 to 12 years old. We moved to a house on the hill behind the nursery, and that's where. So that was it must have been about. Junior high time is when we moved up to that house, and then my parents knew the people, I guess were customers, the Clarks, who might be in here also. I don't know their long history, Lafayette people also.
I think we may have skipped over that too. I know I asked about elementary and high school. What about your middle school or junior high experiences that you remember?
Junior high. I didn't like PE and running. Mrs. Burkhead, I guess, was the teacher. I remember when Kennedy was shot, coming out of the room, and Shannon Kilmartin, one of my good friends that I still keep in touch with, said, the president's been shot, and everybody would go to church, and I started crying because I thought it was, it was sad, but I didn't realize the repercussions of the impact of it. except seeing everybody else crying and everybody going to church, which, at St. Perpetua's there in Lafayette. And I'm not Catholic, although my dad was, so I didn't feel it appropriate to go. Stanley. Mr. Hernandez. Oh, Mr. Hernandez was in middle school. That's where I learned my Spanish best. And then Mr. Glanz was in high school. So there were some interesting teachers there, shall I say. One, Mrs. Yamaguchi, my husband mentioned to me, said to the class afterwards, "I hate you, I hate you, I hate you," to all these students, specific students by name. And then Mr. Noriega, he was very quite a character, and Mr. Hernandez was kind of weird too, but very good instructor of Spanish, because I know my conjugation and everything else still to this day. But there were some students that we recall that were behavior problems, and now they're like making 6-digit salaries and stuff, which is kind of interesting. And we keep in touch with them because of the reunions too. It's like kind of funny. We all laugh. So I think that's about all I can think of.
And so do you have, the people you went to elementary, middle, they all were basically the same class that went into high school, the same students all through? Okay.
And in fact, at one of our reunions, we had a whole, huge, good 20 kids together that had been together at Spring Hill School, the elementary school, and another whole group where my husband was from on Lafayette, that all grew up all the way through. So, and of course the families, I'm sure, socialized also, but my parents never socialized with anybody. They were very intent on keeping our family very cloistered, I guess, and safe and respectable. So.
Do you think that had anything to do with that kind of internment thing, making sure you keep to your family and things like that, and not? Or do you think that's just how
it's a Japanese cultural thing, I think, a lot. Is to save face and don't, embarrass your family.
Okay.
And I'm sure it would have affected the business if we did. So we were model children. Never did anything bad.
So growing up, do you remember, I know you said you're very cloistered, but do you remember things like that the town would have, for instance, like annual Christmas parades or anything like that, or events of that nature that happened?
I don't think there were, like the Art and Wine Festival nowadays, and no. I remember I was able to go to the Walnut Festival every year in Walnut Creek, but that was only from high school, maybe 1 or 2 times. So I don't think Lafayette was that active, activity-wise, that I recall. Maybe I was oblivious to it too. I don't know.
And so, do you think other people living at that time were as cloistered as you? Everybody kind of kept to themselves. We just live in the same area. We're not really a community kind of thing, or.
No, I think it was a pretty close community because everybody knew the different families, I think. Like the Rossies that owned a furniture shop next to my parents, I knew them and grew up and keep in touch with the son still. So maybe they socialized, the parents socialized also with the other kids, but, we weren't allowed to, or, and my parents were not real social people. They were open 7 days a week. They worked long hours and they closed on Thursdays, only because the deliveries didn't come then. So they didn't have much time. They were tired all the time. I do recall, in elementary school that went up to 6th grade at that time. That I was so upset because they were too tired to go to the PTA meeting where your class got points for all the parents coming or not, and I was crying because they were too tired to go, and now I realize why they couldn't go or didn't go. Worked hard.
So in the nursery, did they service the entire town, or was it just for private things, or a commercial nursery, or things like that?
It was a retail nursery. There was just at the other end of town, which is Orchard Nursery now, who was a classmate also of my sister's. Had a bigger nursery, and I remember my dad saying, we have to keep the prices lower because people won't buy from us because they're Japanese. So the other side, the other nursery, did much better, I guess, very well. But although, my parents were able to put all 4 of us through college, so they did okay. And in fact, my dad declined a scholarship for my sister because she got B of A award, the math award, and like AP class type classes. He declined it and said somebody else could use it more. So,
and that was your next
oldest sister, yeah, who's the pharmacist.
Okay. Interesting. And then, so when did your parents pass on that nursery to the person who I believe owns it now?
5 years ago.
Oh, okay, wow.
Recently.
And your parents are still living in Lafayette, or they?
No, they're both deceased.
Oh, okay.
My dad died in 1995, my mom in 2009, and 2010 is when the state, gave me that property, and then my sister has my parents' house.
Okay. And so, you after you went to college and things, what was your kind of impetus, I guess, or what was your decision to come back to live in this area?
My parents, because I was single up until age 35, and I had re-met Patrick and my other ex-boyfriend. They asked me out on the same Christmas that I had come home for the holidays for, and started dating him for 2 years, and was able to get a transfer from Sacramento to Emeryville, and worked for maybe 8 months, and then got pregnant and married and changed jobs and everything in one year. So it was a great year, all positive stress.
And so where you live in Moraga now, is that correct? And so where you live now, is that's where you started living once you got married, or you moved around?
He had a house in Hercules, and I had a house in Carmichael, which is a suburb of Sacramento. So when we got married, I initially went, we stayed there, but that was his ex-wife's house. So I said, well, let's move closer to both our parents in Lafayette. So we looked for a house in Orinda and Lafayette because it was closer to his work in Richmond, and couldn't find anything. So we said, okay, let's open it up to Moraga. So we sold both our houses and were able to afford, moving here.
Okay. And so your children grew up in Moraga. And what? Can we talk about maybe where they went to school and how, if they have any interaction with this kind of generational?
Yes, they do, which is great. And I told them, it's nice because he's gone through all your kindergarten, all your schools up until high school, and they still see. They go to college. They both went to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, My son's in biology, and he went to graduate school and then is now working at the Salk Institute in San Diego as a research scientist and stem cell research. So, and then my daughter graduated in economics and worked for Price Waterhouse for about a year, and then is now with an accounting firm in San Francisco, but she works out of the Walnut Creek office, Burr Pilger Mayer, and my daughter lived in San Francisco for just a little, like 7 months, and she said, "Gosh, we see so many kids from Camp Olindo still." Mm-hmm. So it's nice, and I'd always told them growing up when I was raising them, I said, you better, like my parents did to me, I guess, everybody knows everybody in this town, and so be on the up and up, and don't do anything bad. And so sure enough, now they're saying, and they even go, they travel the world, and they said, they even see people, that they know from Camp Olindo, traveling. So it's great. And I don't know if they can afford to live here after we're gone, but hopefully they have the same, upbringing and grounded, settled feeling. Because we've, had our house here for 28 years, and I don't plan on moving. So, and they both want the house, so we'll see. We'll see. Actually, my son has said, we want to extend the deck out all the way across the property, and we have a lot that goes down, so there's like a 4-car garage down below that has all my husband's gardening stuff in it, and he says, well, can we convert that to a living space so we can live here? And I'm going, fine, after we're gone, you can pay for it too.
He's planning ahead.
Oh yeah. But he wants to eventually move back from San Diego up here, so we'll see. I hope soon.
Do you think it's something about these kind of small communities that makes the residents want to return after they've kind of seen the world, like you said, or gone away, or just kind of...
The small community and the upbringing and the culture and discipline and norms that we grew up with from way back, I think. Because I know I was raised very strictly by my dad, and my mom was the quiet type also. But she was the hard one, and I'd always go to my dad, to ask for, if she said no, I'd go to my dad, and he'd usually say yes, but always explain. So I hope, I think because we're raised very, what's right, we know what's right and wrong, what's black and white, and social manners are so important. And I told my kids, you can be the smartest kid, but unless you have your social manners and graces, and say thank you and please, and open the door, and and be chivalrous, not chauvinistic about opening the door, as my son, and you'll never get anywhere. And my husband has said, I treat my daughter like a princess, so that when she gets married and she dates somebody, that they'll treat her like a princess also. And sure enough, the boys she's dated are wonderful. And my son has always. I told my son growing up, I said, no matter how old you get, I want you to be able to kiss me in public. I'm your mother, and he does. So it's great. And he hugs my dad, and hugs my husband. So it's important, to show that etiquette and just what's right and wrong, which I think is being lost, unfortunately.
So do your kids have much interaction with their grandparents, either your parents or your husband's parents?
More so with my husband's parents, because they have all the siblings, and And they're cousins. There are 22 cousins, so they're very close with all their cousins. We spent a lot of the holidays with them rather than my side because I only had the one sister here, and I told my parents, because I always visited them all during the week and all throughout the year and helped them and stuff, that with all their properties, business stuff, that, I'm going to spend time with, his side of the family. So that, and there were so many more kids, so. And this sister in particular, and the sister in LA didn't really socialize with us, so it was more that side.
And so do your children know all this history that we've been talking about your parents, and now that they came here and they
probably not.
Okay.
That's why it's nice to have this, as well as hopefully, a little bit, of mine that I'm relating about them. Mm-hmm. So appreciate the opportunity.
I think that's it for me. If there's anything else you want to add, or
Bruzonis. I don't know if the Bruzonis. I got the Bruzonis in here. Yeah, Russell and Joan. When my dad got ill for 6 months with pleurisy, and he was in a sanatorium in San Jose, both the Bruzonis and the Marchands were very good to my mom and dad and said, don't worry, Harry, you're not going to lose the property.
When was that about?
When I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Oh, so back in the 50s.
So, very indebted to these two families. And then the McGraths is our classmate. They own Diamond Cake at the other end of Lafayette there, and they're a long-time family also that we grew up with. So.
And so the Bruzonis and the Marchands, and they were just fellow business people that
Yes.
Your parents knew?
Well, they were customers, and what the Marchands built the homes, and they would give the landscaping jobs to my dad. So my dad would, after hours, drop landscaping plans for people to plant certain plants, and hopefully they would buy it because he did it for free. They would buy the plants, and then he'd suggest different gardeners to help plant them. Mm. And then the Bruzonis were the landowners, so they own a lot of land, in La Miranda area here, and they're just very good people.
And the interview has ended at 6:04 p.m.